The morning I left Earth, the sun rose over the Atlantic like it had done for 4 billion years. I watched it from the window of the orbital shuttle terminal, my forehead pressed against the glass, trying to memorize every shade of gold and orange. My name is Alex Chen, and I was 13 years old. In 6 hours, I would be farther from home than any human had any right to be. My mother stood beside me, her hand resting on my shoulder. She had been crying, though she tried to hide it. "You don't have to go," she said for the 10th time. "I know," I said, "but I want to." The Galactic Concord Academy had accepted me. Me, a kid from a coastal city on a planet that was, by galactic standards, a backwater. Earth had only been a member of the Concord for 40 years. Barely long enough to establish a permanent embassy. And now they were letting one of us attend the academy. My father had cried when the acceptance letter arrived. Not sad tears. Proud tears. He was a marine biologist who had spent his life studying the oceans of one planet. The idea that his son would study the oceans of 100 worlds was almost too much for him to process. The shuttle terminal was crowded with other students. Some human, most not. I saw beings that I had only ever seen in holographic textbooks. Ceruleans with skin that shimmered like oil on water. Cathari with elegant antennae that twitched with every sound. A graviton drifted past, their body hovering a few inches above the ground. And I stared longer than I should have. My mother squeezed my shoulder. "Be polite, be curious, be brave." I nodded. The boarding announcement came. A synthesized voice speaking in galactic standard. I picked out the words easily enough. I had been studying for 2 years. I hugged my mother. I hugged my father, who had flown in from his research station just to see me off. Then I picked up my bag and walked toward the gate. I did not look back. Not because I was not scared, but because I knew that if I looked back, I might not have the courage to keep going forward. The terminal was a blur of noise and movement, of languages I understood and languages I did not. I held my bag strapped tightly, my knuckles white, and I repeated my mother's words under my breath like a mantra. Be polite, be curious, be brave. I was not sure I could be all three at once, but I was determined to try. The orbital shuttle was called an Ascender, and it was the most beautiful machine I had ever seen. It was shaped like a teardrop, its hull covered in heat tiles that had seen hundreds of re-entries. The interior was nothing like the cramped capsules I had seen in historical documentaries about early spaceflight. It was spacious, with wide windows and chairs that adjusted to fit any body type. I found my seat near the back, next to a window that faced east. A Cathari student sat across the aisle, their antennae twitching as they reviewed something on a datapad. I wanted to say something, but I did not know the proper greeting protocol. So I just sat there, watching Earth grow smaller through the window. The launch was smoother than I expected. The Ascender rose on a pillar of ionized plasma, climbing through the atmosphere with a grace that belied the enormous forces at work. I watched the sky turn from blue to purple to black. I watched the curve of the horizon sharpen until I could see the thin blue line of the atmosphere, fragile as a soap bubble. And then we were in orbit. The engines cut off, and suddenly there was silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of presence. The silence of being somewhere so vast that your mind cannot fully comprehend it. I unbuckled my harness and drifted slightly. The first taste of microgravity. The Cathari across the aisle looked up and made a sound that might have been laughter. "First time off-world?" they asked. Their voice was melodic, rising and falling in patterns that felt musical. I nodded. "It shows," they said, "but do not worry. We all start somewhere." I wanted to ask their name, where they were from, what they were studying, but the transfer shuttle docked with the transport ship before I could find the words. A new chapter was beginning, And I was not ready for it. I watched the continent below shift from green to brown to blue as the ascender climbed. Cities became specks. Highways became threads. Borders that had seemed so important on maps became invisible from above. The whole planet was one place. One home. And I was leaving it. The thought should have been sad. Instead, it felt like the first page of a story I had been waiting my whole life to read. The transport ship was called the Pathfinder. And it would be my home for the next 2 weeks. It was a massive vessel, bristling with antennae and sensor arrays. Its hull scarred by micrometeorite impacts that told stories of decades of service. The interior was a labyrinth of corridors, each one lined with doors that led to quarters, labs, dining halls. I got lost 3 times in the first hour. The ship carried passengers from a dozen worlds, all bound for the Academy. I saw species I recognized and species I did not. There were reptilian beings with scales that changed color based on their mood. There were insectoid creatures with multifaceted eyes that reflected the corridor lights in 1,000 tiny rainbows. There was a being that looked like a floating crystal, surrounded by a faint halo of light. I tried not to stare. I failed. On the second day, I worked up the courage to sit at a table in the dining hall that was occupied by a cerulean student. Their name was Rin, and they were from a water world called Oceania. Their skin shimmered with patterns of blue and green as they spoke. A biological display that conveyed emotion. "You are the human," Rin said. It was not a question. I nodded. "I have never met a human before." They said, "Your species is very warm." I did not know if that was a compliment or an observation. I decided it was both. Over the next few days, I learned that Rin was studying xenobiology, that they had 7 siblings, that their homeworld had no continents, only endless oceans dotted with floating cities. In return, I told them about Earth, about the oceans my father studied, about the forests and mountains and deserts I had only seen in holos. It felt strange, describing my entire world to someone who had never seen it, but it also felt important. I was representing not just myself, but every human who would come after me. Rin taught me my first lesson in interspecies friendship. Curiosity is never rude if it comes from a genuine desire to understand. They asked about Earth's seasons, about its gravity, about the strange human custom of eating food that had been cooked with fire. I answered every question as honestly as I could, and in return, they told me about the bioluminescent forests of Oceania's deep trenches. I realized I was learning more in one conversation than I had in 2 years of textbooks. Communication across species is harder than I expected. It is not just about language, though language is hard enough. It is about context, about assumptions, about the things you do not know you do not know. The Cathari student from the Ascender, whose name turned out to be Tess, taught me this lesson on the 4th day of the journey. We were in the observation lounge, watching a nebula drift past the viewport. It was a cloud of gas and dust, lit from within by newborn stars. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen outside a window. I said something about how it looked like a painting. Tess tilted their head, antennae curving in a pattern I did not recognize. "A painting?" they asked. "Yes," I said, "like something an artist would create." Tess was quiet for a moment. "In Cathari culture," they said, "comparing something natural to something artificial is considered an insult. You are saying that the creation of the universe is inferior to the creation of a sentient being." I felt my face go red. "I did not mean it that way," I said. "I know," Tess said. "That is why I am telling you. We make mistakes. That is how we learn." It was the first of many mistakes. I made errors in grammar, in gesture, in assumption. I accidentally greeted a graviton by waving, which turned out to be a challenge gesture in their culture. I complimented an aquilin's feather pattern, not knowing that feathers were a sensitive topic related to molting. But each mistake taught me something. And each time, the being I had offended chose to forgive me rather than dismiss me. I began to understand something that no textbook had ever conveyed. The academy was not just a school. It was a place where beings from 100 worlds learned to be wrong together. And being wrong, I discovered, was the first step toward being right. By the end of the journey, I had collected more mistakes than achievements. But I had also collected something more valuable: relationships. Thes had become a patient teacher. Rin had become a trusted friend. And I had begun to understand that the academy was not a destination. It was a process, a continuous unfolding of understanding that would take years, maybe decades, to complete. I was ready to begin. On the 14th day, the Pathfinder dropped out of faster than light travel, and I saw the academy for the first time. It was not a single structure. It was a city of structures, spread across an asteroid belt that orbited a blue-white star. Spires of crystal and metal rose from the largest asteroids, connected by bridges of light that pulsed with energy. Domes covered entire sections, each one housing a different environment. I could see the blue of water, the green of forests, the orange of desert. There were ships of every size moving between the structures, a traffic pattern that seemed chaotic but was clearly orchestrated with precision. The transport ship threaded through the maze of asteroids, heading for the main hub. I pressed my face against the viewport, the same way I had pressed it against the terminal window on Earth. Rin floated beside me, their skin shimmering with excitement. "It is beautiful," I whispered. "It is home," Rin said. "For the next 4 years. At least." The ship docked at a massive airlock, and I gathered my belongings for the second time. I had been traveling for 2 weeks. I had crossed light years of space. I had met beings from worlds I had never heard of. And now I was here. The airlock cycled open, and I stepped onto the platform of the Galactic Concord Academy. The air smelled different, cleaner, slightly ionized. The gravity was slightly lighter than Earth's, making me feel like I was walking on cushions. Beings of every shape and size moved through the corridors around me, and none of them looked twice at the human boy with the wide eyes and the nervous smile. I was just another student, and that, more than anything, made me feel like I belonged. The scale of the academy was impossible to process. Each spire was the size of a city block. Each dome contained an ecosystem. I later learned that the asteroid belt had been terraformed over centuries. Each rock hollowed out and filled with atmosphere, gravity generators, and life. The academy was not a school. It was a civilization dedicated to learning. And I was standing at its doorstep, a 13-year-old boy from a planet that had barely discovered interstellar travel. Orientation week was overwhelming in the best possible way. We were divided into groups, each one led by a senior student who had been at the academy for at least 2 years. My group leader was a graviton named Zephyr, who hovered slightly above the ground as they spoke, their voice a soft hum that vibrated through the air. Our group had 12 students, 3 humans, 2 ceruleans, a Cathari, 2 aquilins, a reptilian being from a world called Sarth, and 2 species I could not identify no matter how hard I tried. We were told to introduce ourselves and share something about our homeworld. When my turn came, I talked about Earth's oceans, about the creatures my father studied, about the way the sunset looked over the water. I stumbled over words. I forgot the galactic standard term for dolphin and had to describe it as a swimming air-breathing creature. But no one laughed. They listened, and when I was done, they asked questions. Real questions, not polite ones. What is the salinity range of your oceans? How many species have been catalogued? Do your people have a symbiotic relationship with any marine life? I answered what I could and admitted what I could not. That afternoon, we were given our schedules: xenobiology, astropolitics, quantum linguistics, gravitational physics, cross-species ethics. I looked at the list and felt a mixture of terror and excitement. I was actually going to study these things. Not from textbooks, but from beings who had lived them. I was going to learn about the universe from the universe itself. And I was going to start tomorrow. That night, I lay in my quarters and stared at the ceiling. My room was small, barely larger than a closet, but it had a window that looked out at the stars. I watched the asteroid field drift past, silent and ancient, and I thought about my parents. I wondered if they were looking up at the same stars from Earth, wondering if their son was okay. I sent them a short message before I fell asleep. Just 3 words. I made it. My first class was xenobiology, taught by a cerulean professor named Dr. Maris. Their skin rippled with colors as they spoke, each hue corresponding to a different concept or emotion. It took me half the class to realize that the color changes were not random. They were a second layer of communication, one that my human eyes were not trained to parse. The topic was cellular adaptation in low-gravity environments. I had studied the basics on Earth, but the depth of the material was beyond anything I had prepared for. Dr. Maris spoke about gene expression, about epigenetic markers, about the way entire evolutionary paths could be redirected by a change in gravitational constant. I took notes as fast as I could, but I kept falling behind. After class, I stayed behind to ask a question. Dr. Maris turned to face me, their skin shifting to a shade of blue that I later learned indicated patience. I asked about the relationship between gravity and cell wall permeability. Dr. Maris paused. That is a surprisingly sophisticated question for a first class. I felt my face warm. I have a good teacher, I said. Dr. Maris's skin flickered with what I hoped was amusement. The first test came at the end of the week. It was not graded, they said. It was diagnostic. But I still felt the pressure as I stared at the questions. They were written in Galactic Standard, with terms I had to look up in my portable translator. I answered what I could. I guessed at what I could not. And when I submitted my work, I felt like I had failed. But when the results came back, Dr. Maris pulled me aside. You did better than you think, they said. Your foundation is solid. You just need to learn to think in Galactic Standard, not translate everything from human English. The concepts are the same. The words are just different. I held on to those words for the rest of the week. I spent the weekend in the library, surrounded by data crystals and holographic texts. I studied Galactic Standard technical vocabulary, drilling myself on terms I would need for the next class. Rin found me there and dragged me to the dining hall. You cannot study all the time, they said. Your brain needs fuel. I protested, but they were right. The break helped. And when Monday came, I walked into class feeling more prepared. Not confident, but prepared. That was enough. The best part of the academy was not the classes. It was the people, or the beings, or whatever word you used for sentient creatures who were becoming your friends. Rin and I developed a routine. We would meet in the dining hall every morning, sharing stories about our classes, our challenges, our small victories. Thess would sometimes join us, their antennae twitching with interest as they listened to our conversations. One evening, about 3 weeks into the semester, the 3 of us were sitting in the observation dome, watching the asteroid field drift past the star at the center of the system was setting, casting long shadows across the crystal spires. I was quiet, thinking about home. Rin must have noticed. You are thinking about your planet, they said. I nodded. Do you miss it? Thess asked. Yes, I said, but I also love it here. Is that strange? Rin's skin shimmered with a pattern I had learned meant empathy. It is not strange. They said, it is the most natural thing in the universe. To love two places at once. To belong to both and neither. To carry one world in your heart while you explore another. That is what it means to be a citizen of the Concord. I looked at the two of them. Beings from worlds so different from mine. Sitting together under the light of a distant star. A cerulean, a Cathari, and a human. 3 species. 1 table. 1 moment of understanding. I realized that this was what I had come for. Not the knowledge, though I wanted that too. But the connection. The proof that beings from different worlds could sit together and simply be together. Without translation. Without misunderstanding. Without fear. We stayed in the observation dome until the star rose again. And when we finally left, I felt something I had not felt since leaving Earth. I felt at home. Looking back, I realized that moment in the observation dome was when I stopped being a visitor and started being a student. Not because of any official ceremony, but because I had found my place. A human, a cerulean, and a Cathari, sitting together under the light of a distant star. We were living proof that the Academy's mission worked. That beings from different worlds could not only coexist, but connect. And I was part of it. I write to my parents every week. It takes 9 days for a message to reach Earth from the Academy. And another 9 for a reply. The delay does not bother me anymore. It gives me time to think about what I want to say. In my latest letter, I told them about Rin, about Thess, about Dr. Maris, and the first test I told them about the observation dome and the sunset that lasted 6 hours because of the orbital mechanics of the asteroid belt. I told them that I was learning things I had never imagined. And that I was failing at things I had never tried. And that both experiences were making me better. I wrote to my father about the xenobiology classes. About the parallels between Earth's marine ecosystems and the life forms on Oceania. I wrote to my mother about the food. About how I had finally found a dish that tasted like home. Even though it was made from ingredients that had never touched Earth's soil. At the end of the letter, I wrote, I think about the sunrise on the morning I left. I think about how scared I was. And I think about how I almost let that fear stop me from stepping onto the ascender. I am glad I did not. Because on the other side of that fear was everything I had ever wanted. A year ago, I was a boy on a planet, looking up at the stars and wondering. Now I live among them. I am still learning. I am still making mistakes. But I am here, and that is enough. I sealed the letter and sent it on the next outgoing transmission. Then I picked up my datapad and headed to class. There was a lecture on gravitational physics that I did not want to miss. The universe was waiting, and I was ready. I still get homesick sometimes. I think that will never fully go away. But the homesickness has transformed into something else. It is no longer a weight pulling me back. It is a root system. Grounding me. Reminding me where I came from. Earth is still my home. But the Academy has become my home too. And I have learned that a person can have 2 homes. Just as they can have 2 parents. 2 languages. 2 hearts. The universe is big enough for all of it.